I see. I'm just going to go down the list. Let me put this in gallery view. It's way easier to do that. Here we go. Then I can kind of pick out everybody. As I'm going through the list, I know Marlo Knipe is a former ambassador, but she's a very active member. So welcome, Marlo. From our ambassadors, we also have Jonathan Lorbacher, Stacy Conkle. I see Lacey Nash, James Menzies. Going through my list. If I missed anybody, I'm terribly sorry. And then from our residential cleaning council, we have, as I mentioned, Stacy Conkle is on here, Beth Derrickson, Bruce Vance, Vicki Brown. And then did I see Dom? Yeah, Dominic Williams is on here. So welcome everybody from our residential cleaning council. If anybody wants to say hi or anything, please feel free.
Hey guys, happy
Hello. Yes.
happy Thursday, happy July 11th.
Yes, Friday Eve.
Hey, we would love to hear from the council what some of the perhaps changes or some of the additions. What are we doing to make progress with our residential cleaning industry? Anyone?
I have something that's kind of exciting that we're working on, and it's based off of information that we've heard from a lot of members and non-members, and that's getting membership not being an annual membership, it's doing it like spread out. So that's in the works. Heather, I don't know if you have any update on that, but we did hear that from a lot of people that it's kind of tough to do it annually. So they wanted to spread the payments out.
Yeah, that will be an option with our new CRM. So we're working through that and making sure that's operational. We don't have a launch date on that, but yes, we have heard that from several of our residential businesses involved in the association. So we have heard you. We are working on implementing that capability. As all of you probably know, with new tech systems, implementation takes quite a while, but it's in process. IT knows the ask, so we are in development. So thank you for always keeping us apprised to what your needs are.
The other thing that we're doing, does somebody want to speak to the mastermind groups? I don't know, Stacy, if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to bring up. So we got a couple of things. One, we started earlier this year our new member orientation, and that's really for anybody new or existing members. So every month we're just going through all of what's going on, the your account, all the benefits, etc. Because most of us could use a reminder. And then starting in September, we're going live with masterminds group. So this is members only. And then just generally speaking, you're meeting with other business owners that are, playing in the same sandbox as you and going over some, content or pain points rather, being able to just work with people who are in the same, revenue world as your business.
Are those calls scheduled for once a month, or how is that scheduled?
We're planning to do quarterly is the initial idea. Now, as we break out, that may change based on what people need and want, but we're planning to start quarterly.
Okay. That's
Do
great.
not have a link for that yet. I was looking to see if that was up. I'll check in with Martha and get that for you. But our first one is September 18th. I believe, or September 17th.
Tuesday, whatever that Tuesday, I think we said, right?
Okay.
Either way, the link will be coming.
Yes, I'll get that out to everybody, and it is exclusively for members. So that's one of the things that we're really excited to put this forward and to help you make connections and really dive into the issues that are, that can help you with your business.
Right.
Yeah. How long is that call? Is that a Zoom call or?
I think we're doing Zoom, right?
Yeah, there'll be 1 hour Zoom calls.
Right. Yeah, I think we were talking about doing breakouts. We're still kind of figuring out the, how this is all going to work. But we're starting out with everyone together and then potentially doing breakouts into, whatever makes sense for your business.
That's
Would you
wonderful to see that we're making great progress. Stacy, I think one of the things that Kate did come up a while ago, and Jeannie Anderson and I had even spoken about this, um, the mentorship program.
Yeah.
Any movement on that?
I don't know where we're at with that. Jeannie's not here today. I have not gotten an update. We meet again next week, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Heather knows. I don't know.
I
She was
think
helping with
Jeannie,
that.
yeah, I think Jeannie was in the process of meeting with Hygieia,
Mhm.
Felicia over there at Hygieia, and establishing a specific mentorship kind of group within their platform. So I think she just needs to understand how we can work the residentials into that. But all members of ISSA are welcome to join that platform now. It's
Mhm.
always available to you. We don't have something established just for residential, but it's for the cleaning industry as a whole. So feel free to start going in there and trying to find mentors that way, even though we don't have just residential yet. There are already several residential cleaning company mentors
Mhm.
the platform. So feel free to
Right.
check that out. It's free to use.
Would you mind putting a link in there, please? Just to make the
Sure.
process
I'm
easy.
looking for the
Thank
link
you.
right now.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And
Absolutely.
a big thank you to the entire council, Chairwoman Jeannie Anderson, for what you guys are doing. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Go ahead, Gosha.
All right. I think we should start with Renee O'Brien, so we don't, so we can really dive deep into this. Your leadership development report card. Wow,
Yes.
that's an amazing topic. And Renee, how does that look like? Tell us
Well,
more.
I'm just, I've been getting a lot of questions lately about how do you actually develop leaders? And, you can hire people, you can promote people, you can put people in a leadership position, but how do you actually make a leader? And what kind of programs actually work? And how can you actually develop that? So I started doing a little research. I thought it'd be a great thing to chat about. I've come up with about 20 different characteristics of some things to kind of evaluate in your own business, how I'm doing as far as developing my own leadership skills as an owner and developing the leadership skills of the leaders that I have with me. Because if you start to develop leaders in your company, and let's say that you've got someone who's running your business, but you don't really trust that maybe they make errors, or maybe they don't make decisions in the same way you do, or maybe they make a decision and then they retract their decision. You're not going to hand over the reins. You're going to be kind of tied to that business. And you'll kind of keep them from their potential as well, because you really haven't quite set them up for success in that way. So I'm hoping we can just cover some different topics. And I think I put together about 20-25 minutes worth of information here, might be a little bit less, so that we have lots of time for questions, discussion.
Wonderful. Do you have a PowerPoint? Do you have a presentation? Should we dive in?
No, I didn't bring a presentation. I wasn't sure how this format worked. I'd seen a couple of your YouTube videos and it looked like it was just coffee talk. So
Coffee talk.
I got tea. Okay. Well, great. So basically,
Renee, before we start, would you mind, there is probably some people that may not know you. Can you tell them about yourself? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Renee O'Brien. I'm a business coach and consultant for all kinds of service businesses, but been working primarily about 50% of my business is cleaning businesses. And I've been doing this for, I don't know, it's less than 30 years, but it's more than 25. So that pigeonholes me a little bit there. But I work with businesses of all size, anywhere from small all the way up to the largest businesses in the industry. I work with them on things like profitability, growing pains, especially in the later years. I've been working with them on how do they build those leadership teams. I do things like I can come out to your business and facilitate meetings and help you develop those leaders, but also work with you one-on-one, all kinds of stuff like that. So I've been doing it for many years, and I just really enjoy working with small businesses, and it's just always changing. I mean, what we love in the cleaning business is we love the idea of let's set it and forget it. But as soon as you take your head away and you think you've set it and forget it, everything changes. So yep. That keeps it interesting. So a lot of times when I'm coming up with topics, I'm coming up with topics because they're questions that are constantly being asked. And so right now, kind of a lot of the questions of the hour are about how can I actually truly step away from my business and develop those leaders. And when you've got a really good, strong leadership team, the whole business blossoms because you're not the only one pulling that business up the mountain. You've got an entire team of people, an army of people who are assisting you with that. And then when you bring in new leaders, they understand what the culture is about and they get on board and they help push that boulder up the mountain. Yeah.
That makes sense. Absolutely. All right. So let's dive into what does it
Topic.
take.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I just wanted to talk basically about, when it is that you go, when you're bringing on new leaders. Kind of a show of hands. Do people have leaders in their business? Looks like we've got some pretty good sized businesses on here. Everybody pretty much got somebody. Does anybody have, well, I won't, there's a big group here, so I won't take feedback until later, I'd say. But typically what people find is that they get started with their business. They find I'm going to hire technicians that are going to work out in the field. And if I'm going to put technicians out in the field, I better have a training program, right? So they put together a training program and they start to train the employees, and that works really, really good. And we might put like maybe a 2-week training program in place for the technicians to get them going. And then maybe you have an advancement. If you're really kind of advanced, you have a training program to train those team leads, or maybe you have a training program to train the trainers. But very few companies, the higher up you go in the company for positions, the less likely you really have real leadership development. And some of the tougher stuff when you say hire someone to be a sales manager, or you hire someone to be a scheduling manager or an office manager, some of the harder stuff is not the how-tos. You probably showed them, how do you use your software? How do you process a deposit? How do you change a schedule? But it's the harder stuff is about the soft skills. How do you lead people? How do you inspire people? How do you motivate, hold people accountable, delegate, all that good stuff? And that's the stuff that a lot of companies are lacking in what kind of leadership development they have. So typically what companies I'll hear from them is that I've got someone in place, but they don't really solve problems. So I still have to be there. They aren't really meeting my goals. They're working really hard. They're here every day, but we're not really moving the needle forward. They're not really running engaging meetings. If I'm not in the meeting, it doesn't become engaging. I also hear things like, they really struggle to delegate with effectiveness. They delegate things, but they don't really follow up. Stuff doesn't really get done. I have to kind of come in there and make sure it's getting done. They spend a lot of time on the urgent items, but they don't necessarily spend time on the important items. And in general, lots of other things, or maybe they don't really know what to communicate, how, and to who. And especially the owner, let's say you're going to step back and you want managers to run things. How am I going to do that if they're not giving me the information I want to know? Maybe I hear endless detail about the unhappy customer that you had the other day, but I don't hear about the big headline of the week, which is, we don't have enough staff and our source for getting employees is no longer working, that we're not really dividing that. And in general, if you were going to pull all these kind of worries together, it's that they're not necessarily driving results. They can run my business day to day. They can do the tasks I've given them, but they're not really driving the results. So what I'm hoping to talk about today is ways that you can actually put some leadership development in so that you'll be able to do that. So I would say that leadership development has changed. In fact, there's quite a few leadership development companies that have the same kind of philosophy. It's not the way that it used to be. And I'll take a little think back, maybe a lot further than any of you guys are, but when I was a child, okay, and your parents told you to do something, you would say, well, why should I do that? And they'd say, because I said so. Anybody out there remember that?
Right.
Maybe, right? But actually jobs weren't that different. Well, the first jobs I got, you just did things the way they told you to do them. That's what you were supposed to do. And it was a very strict hierarchy and it was very top down. And that's not necessarily how we want things now. Think about all the things. If you were to hire one office manager to run everything for your business, what would be all the things that they would have to know how to do? They'd have to be able to run software, manage payroll, make decisions in the office, delegate things, take care of customers, do sales, everything, so many things, right? So they need to be able to be smart. They need to be able to make decisions. They need to be able to be in line with what you've got going on with the company plans. It's not something you can lay out and say step 1, step 2, step 3, right? They have to be able to think on their feet and stick with what, and it has to be a little bit more collaborative. So think about leadership developed today is not about a one size, one and done type of training. I'm going to provide this training and then this person is going to become a leader and forevermore, they're going to know what they're doing. It's going to be more about, I am going to provide some training, I'm going to provide some mentorship, and I'm going to remove the barriers that I have in my workplace that actually keep them from becoming leaders. There's sort of a handoff, like a relay, when I'm controlling everything and I give assistants tasks to do, okay? When I'm doing that, I'm going to hang on to things really, really tightly. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to have control over everything. That's really different from when I just hand it off and let other people make decisions. There's sort of a big transition there. How do we actually get from one area to the next? So that's what I want to talk about a little bit. So I've got kind of an old and a new. Let's see here. The old way of leadership development would be we hold employees accountable. We hear that all the time. We hear it multiple times a week probably, right? But the new way is we're going to remove barriers so that people can hold themselves accountable. Sometimes we do things like we tell them that, if we say that I'm going to go back and check all this stuff and come back and let you know where you've made all these mistakes, well, then they don't have to check their own work because you're going to do it for them, right? And so we need to make sure that we're not doing things that are keeping them from being able to check their own work and redirecting them. Old way would say you need to be an inspiring leader, okay? New way says I need to connect purpose and impact, meaning the way I'm going to inspire is I'm going to make sure you understand everything that's going on so that you're driving things and you understand that everything you're doing, how it impacts the company and how it helps us achieve our goals. Old way of leadership development would be that leadership is done by people in power. New way is leadership is done by everyone. Old way would be leadership vision goals are set by the owners. But the new way is the vision, the goals, the mission are set collaboratively. They are set by everyone. They all participate. Top-down assessment and planning would be the old way. Designing and developing efforts and partnerships and teams is the way of the future, is how we're going to do things together. Because you can have a whole bunch of individuals, but if they don't work well as a team, the team isn't going to be able to produce anything for you. Old way would say we're going to look at a skills gap. We're going to do a skills gap analysis, and then we're going to prescribe a training. But the new way says, that learning is through applying new principles and practices, and it's not always one-sided. It's not always one and done. So that's kind of the concept. What's old versus new. So let's go through some actual leadership abilities that we actually need in order to have a good leadership development program. You can kind of just keep little scorecard for yourself. Let me see how many I am going to suggest. These are probably not an exhaustive list, but I have about 16, and some of these can be broken up. Just kind of ask yourself, how am I doing and where could I actually make some improvements in these areas? Give yourself a little report card. So the first one's kind of a weird one, and you might not necessarily even think about this as leadership development, but I think it's first on purpose because it's super important and you almost can't do any of the other things unless your leaders can do this. The first one is that your people need to know how to understand other people's motivations. They have to be able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. If I do this, how will my employees feel? If I make this decision, how will my clients feel? If I make this decision, how will the team feel? And so that when you can understand the motivation, what do I need to do in order to, if I were that employee, how is that employee motivated to achieve success? So when I'm talking, I'm only not talking about my perspective, but I'm talking about what motivates them. Let's see, an example would be, let's see, basically, if you were going to try to do, let's say an employee was having, stumbling today. Anyway, so basically you want to understand from their point of view. Like let's say you want to enact a new policy. And if you're going to enact a new policy, don't talk about what you want and why it needs to happen. Talk about why it'll be better for them in their job, why it's better for them for their skills, why, how it'll help the company move forward. And you understand how they're motivated because they want to be accomplished. They want to feel like they're capable. So we need to understand other people's motivations. So the second thing would be problem solving. Don't put someone in a leadership position unless they have some kind of ability to problem solve. And then we need to teach them through some trainings, through some mentorship, through some follow-up, leadership by example. We need to teach them how to get to the root of the problem. So for example, let's say you have a team where let's say you have team meetings, and in the team meetings, you're going through, say, company numbers. And it's always the same kind of, this is my number, and it's really kind of dry, and there really isn't kind of any kind of connection. And let's say maybe there's been a lot of cancellations lately, client cancellations. Okay, so what's, if you're trying to get to the root of the problem, somebody should say, hey, what is the reason that we're having these client cancellations? And we need to go back through the food chain and figure out what is the first domino to fall that's causing all the other dominoes. And so if you don't have people who ask that initial question, which is why is this happening, then we really need to work with them on how they can get to the root of the problem, because otherwise you're just going to put out whatever fire it is, and then you'll have the problem again and again and again. So you can do this by discussing issues, company issues as groups, so that you can lead by example, and you can try to ask prompting questions to try to get people to think about what specifically are the problems and what are the contributing factors, and teach them how they can actually get to the root of the problem. This is actually a pretty big problem with a lot of new management. They just, they don't necessarily know that they even have the authority to be able to look into the root of the problem. They're waiting for you to tell them what to do, but we want them to try to figure out what, just like you would do instinctually, what is the source of that problem, and see if we can go ahead and fix it and prevent it for the next time. Also part of this is you want to make sure that in your meetings that there's no elephants in the room. Let's say you're having meeting after meeting and everybody's talking about how great it is. There's no issues, everything's wonderful, but your revenue's going down, or your revenue's flat, or your client attrition is through the roof, or marketing costs are through the roof, but you're staying the same size. There's obviously a problem. No issues is an issue. So we really need to make sure that people are thinking all the time that we're not trying to get through a meeting quickly. We're not trying to check things off the list. We're not trying to not have conflict all the time. Instead, what we're trying to do is see if we can identify what those issues are and get to the root of the problem so we can solve those. Okay, so then the third thing I would say that we're looking for and that we'd like to set up development for would be people that are being strategic. We actually want people to be strategic, meaning we want them to try, when they're solving problems, it's sort of an extension of the solving problems. We want them to think about a strategy. Like, for example, let's say that clients are canceling all the time, and you have got to the root of the problem. If you keep doing everything exactly the same way, you're not going to solve the problem. So we need them to figure out strategically how we can solve that problem. It might not be that, hey, this is what we say to them when they cancel and we try to save them and, decrease frequency or whatever else. It might be that our strategy is we're going to start way back to the expectations we set with the client when they get started. And we're going to check in with the client, every 3 months, and we're going to have an interview with them to make sure that we're on track and repivot. I'm just making these things up, but that would be more of a strategy, something that is more overall. Now, a lot of times management does not take that kind of authority in order to do the strategy because they don't know if they can. So one thing you can think about when you are developing leaders and when you're giving it tasks, even to experienced leaders, is what level of authority am I giving them about this responsibility? I usually think that there's about 6 levels of authority. Well, the first level is something like, I just want you to go gather some information, bring me the information about this problem that I've identified, and I'm going to work it out, and I'm going to figure out the solution, and I really don't want you to do anything other than gather the information. That would be like level 1 of authority. But then that goes all the way up to level 6, where really I want you to let me know that there was a problem last week. You handled it. I don't need to know anything more. You know, you're really handing it over to somebody. And then there's all the different levels of authority in between. Because when I work with owners, I will find that they will get frustrated because they'll say things like, well, it's common sense. Why didn't this manager handle this way? Well, common sense isn't common. That's one thing. But they, sometimes you're asking that manager to go ahead and handle everything, but sometimes you're thinking, oh, this is really mission critical. I really just want them to, you know, get a little bit of information, come to me with a proposed solution, you know, and you're not maybe clear. Maybe you're not even clear with yourself about how much level of authority. So by you identifying what levels of authority, making that part of your communication language in, you know, in your offices, is let people know when you're giving them a task, I'm giving this to you, and I think this should be, you know, level of authority 3. And I can actually give you a list of what they are and how they are. But if you make this part of the common language, then you'll make things very clear and you'll give people permission to be strategic. If they've got the power on a project to be strategic, you'll be getting out of your own way on that. Okay, so the fourth one I would say is delegation. So a lot of time, you know, very important part of leadership is delegation, but a lot of people don't delegate, you know, completely. They delegate pretty well. But if you don't delegate completely, what happens is leaders, new leaders especially, will realize it doesn't work. I gave them a task, they weren't able to do it, or they refused to do it, or they said they did it and they didn't really do it, or they gave me something I really didn't want to see. And so then they give up because they figure it didn't work out. Or maybe even the owner comes back to them and says, hey, how come you didn't hold this person accountable? And so delegation in their mind doesn't necessarily work. But there's really some good factors in terms of the way you want to delegate. And you want to try to do this as yourself as an owner, is make sure you're employing and leading by example. Is when I'm going to delegate something to somebody, I have to think about, first of all, the place and time that I'm going to be giving the delegation. You know, sometimes sending a text that has 3 words in it may not be enough. It's not enough context. It's not enough, you know, background. Does that person really know what they need to do? So you want to think about, how much time do I really need to be able to explain this well? What resources does this person really need? What deadline am I expecting them to get it done by? How much time do I expect it to take? And possibly I'm even going to give them examples. Now you're probably thinking, well, geez, Renee, if I'm going to do all of that, I might as well just do it myself. But hopefully if you start to get in this pattern, people will learn faster, and you won't have to do that for very long. You won't have to put as much into it because they're going to get into your rhythm. They're going to understand what you need and what your expectations are much faster, and you won't be repeating yourself as much. Now, the most important part that I forgot about that is the follow-up. So, well, 2 parts, the follow-up and kind of the check-in point. Let's say you're going to give somebody a new project, especially if they really aren't that great about delivering stuff to you. Give them a project, say this should take you about 4 hours, but I would like to check in with you on Wednesday. And I want it done on Friday. I'll check in with you on Wednesday, and I'd like to see half of it done so that we can talk about it. So that if you're going on the wrong direction, I can redirect, or if I haven't given you all the resources you need, we can redirect. And then you have to be sure that you follow through and check in with them. So if you do all of this, then your leaders are going to follow you with that example, especially if we outline it for them about what you need to do. And then the follow-up. So let's say you've given a project and you've given a deadline. Has anybody in here given a deadline and then they never check back to see if it's actually done? Right? Like we all do that sometimes. And so what that message sends to everybody is, sometimes when I'm asked to do things, it means something, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's really kind of risky for a leader in your company to spend time to go after doing something, especially if it's outside of their box or their comfort zone, and then maybe it's not recognized. Maybe they're chastised for spending time on the wrong item. Maybe, hey, I killed myself, I even stayed 2 hours later, and then nobody even asked me about it, so it's discouraging. So it's important with delegation that we're clear up front about what our expectations are, and then we follow back up and kind of follow through with that. And, try to keep the delegation simple. Try not to have, if you give somebody 100 items, you obviously don't have time to do all those 100 things. Try to just keep it simple to begin with. Okay, let's move along, or we're going to take some time here. The next one would be timing and priority management. So I can't tell you how many times I hear about new leaders in a company. People are like, oh my gosh, they just don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to multitask. They don't, I hear that a lot, right? And I would say that that's probably true, but it's also, they don't necessarily know how to prioritize, and they don't necessarily know how to prioritize the way you do. And so we really need to make sure that we're on the same page and we're aligned about what are priorities and how their time should be managed. So if you guys ever have known me or worked with me, you know that I'm in love with a block schedule. And block schedules are a nice way for you to outline ahead of time, make appointments with yourself about dedicated time for certain types of responsibilities and tasks. And, very highly effective CEOs and things like that use that because they don't have very much time available. But it also does another thing, which is if you have a block schedule and it's made sort of public amongst your team members, if you have time that's designated for project time or other types of time where they really can't be disturbed, everybody else knows it. They're not going to come and harass you and give you new things. And when we tell employees that we want to manage their time, the number one reason that they are not able to do it, if it's from an outside force, is because owners don't let them do it. Owners come in and they try to control the time. They try to come in and say, here's an extra little item. I know it's 4:35, but can you do this half an hour project right before 5 p.m.? Or they say, I wouldn't have spent the time like that. And they jump in before the person has really had a chance to kind of work out where their time is spent. So if you use block schedules and you're planning your time out ahead of time, it gives the owner a chance to comment and still have some kind of understanding of what's being prioritized, but without jumping in and second guessing before they really had a chance to do it on their own. Because if you have somebody who's really trying to take a leadership role, but every time they try to take a step forward, you who've done that task a million times come in and say, oh, well, I would have done it like this. Oh, make sure you do it like that. You're getting in front of them and they'll just give up because they'll say, well, I'm never going to be able to learn it. And they're just going to come in and change the expectations or the timelines anyway. Okay, so the next one that's important is decision making. We need to work with people on how they can be good decision makers. Again, I'll tie that back into the authority, like what kind of decisions are we allowing them to make? Do we want to be as clear as possible about what kind of decisions they can make and what kinds they can't, because people, again, don't want to stick their neck out, make a decision, and then find out later that they did it wrong. And another thing is a lot of companies want to promote from within, right? They want to give people career opportunities. But think about that. If you take your best person that's really, really successful in their role and you promote them and you put them in a leadership role, which they don't know how to do, and we don't provide them any support, now they feel like, well, shoot, I'm really failing at this. I used to be the star and now I'm really failing at this. And I feel kind of like I don't really know where my resources are. So you want to be as supportive as possible and teach people what decisions they can make and how they can go about making decisions. Let's see, you can do this by documenting internal processes and norms, and you can do it by group planning and setting objectives, and you can do that by not second guessing their decisions once they do it. Let's say you've told someone, hey, I want you to make decisions on customer breakage. You're allowed to make a decision on any customer breakage that is less than $1,000. Then let them do it. Don't jump in and start asking them, well, I would have done it like this. I would have checked prices. I would have done that. Let them know what the process is. Let them do it. And then they're going to come back with whatever the results, win, lose, or draw. And then you're going to have feedback. And if you support the failures as much as you support the successes, they will know it's okay to fail and that, we're going to do it differently next time. And they won't bury their results. Because I don't know if anybody's ever had somebody who works for you who's like, yep, it's getting done. Yes, it's great. But you can't really trust any of it because when they make mistakes, they're not necessarily bringing it to the forefront because they feel silly and they wanted to succeed and they weren't able to do it. Okay, so the next one would be communicates often and open. So basically, good leaders have great communication. They are not a silo for information. They are communicating with everybody around them. Everybody is welcome. You can control your time. Obviously, you're not available at every moment, but people have to know that you're a good listener and that you're making decisions that are open and fair, and you're communicating the things that are important. Sometimes we lose employees or leaders because they feel like, well, let's talk about, say, a company who's going to open another office location. One of the big problems with opening another office location is the other office feels like they're not part of anything. Like basically somehow the company isn't used to communicating all that's been going on. All the decisions are happening at the main office, but this other office location feels left out. So they're kind of like, well, shoot, I didn't really know anything about that. And they just don't feel like they're completely part of it. But when it comes to communication, how we can actually develop that is we can set some guidelines of what kind of communication happens when and how. Like a very basic level would be we praise in public and we penalize in private. So basically, if you're going to talk to somebody about something that's, constructive criticism, that's never done in a group setting. That's always done in a private setting. And if you're going to talk about something that somebody did great, feel free to praise them in public if they're comfortable with that. Sounds like a very basic one, but a lot of new leaders mess that up. You might have a company Slack channel and they put something on there that can somehow slightly be seen as cutting somebody down, and then all of a sudden that person wants to leave because they don't feel like they feel like they've been embarrassed in front of the group. But there's lots of things like that. What's appropriate for private, what's appropriate for one-on-one, what's appropriate for small group. Also is what's appropriate text, when to text, when to email, when to call, when to do in person. And always communicating with confidence and positivity. You got a new leader. New leaders might be a little freaked out about some of the chaos that happens in cleaning businesses sometime, or a bad day. But really important to teach them, leading by example and talking with them, and setting them up with some trainings about how to always be exuding confidence and positivity, because they're the leader. It's like if the boat is going down, if the captain's freaking out, it's not going to work out. So that's an important point. So that was our number 7, communication. Okay, next one would be mentoring. So you basically, we would love it if all of a sudden you're going to hire these leaders and they're going to come in with skills and they're going to know what to do and they're just going to take off running. They don't, right? It takes time. And here you are, you hired the leader because you're busy and you don't have time to be spending a lot of time training them. But on the other hand, if we don't provide some training, then they're really not going to be set up for success. So sometimes they bring in coaches like me, or maybe there's someone else, like they do some peer-to-peer, that's helpful. But somehow we need to have both coaching, which helps people with their own individual skills, and mentoring, which is a transfer of knowledge of how to do things in a practical setting. So, sometimes a new leader might not know how to say, fire somebody or implement some employee discipline, but until they actually watch somebody do it, until they actually get some guidance, they try it themselves one time and then they get immediate feedback like 15 minutes later or something like that. And that's mentoring. So you do have to make some time for mentoring. And if you can create a culture, a system for how mentoring happens in your company, you will be constantly growing your own leaders. All right, next one would be setting vision, mission, and goals. Again, when you first start your business, the vision and the goals come from you staying up all night thinking about what you're going to do with your business next week, or next year. And we do that for a long time, where basically you're creating your goals, you're creating the vision, and you come and you have a company meeting, you say, okay, team, this is where we're going. But what works a lot better as you start to get bigger is you need buy-in from those leaders. If you come in and you just try to dictate where the company is going, they don't have any feeling about it. It doesn't mean anything to them necessarily. So even though it's more tedious, it takes more time, it's good to have a more collaborative approach and get buy-in, get people to contribute ideas about where the company is going. Not only do you get ideas, but if these leaders are working in the roles that they should be, they're going to see things in their role that you can't see, right? You're not answering the calls every single day. You're not dealing with the employee out in the field every single day. And so they're going to see things and they're going to have ideas that are going to be different than yours because they're seeing practical issues about what's going on. And you need all of those answers in the room. I know some companies use things like personality assessments as they're, you know, working with their staff, maybe even as they're onboarding some of their people, just to kind of identify the right role for where people can be. And when you use those types of things, it might be tempting to say, let's get everybody who's all one type of personality, which we probably shouldn't be doing that for any kind of hiring anyway. But in general, what happens if you do that? If you do that, you end up with everybody who thinks one way. And you can only think through your tiny little lens of how that business is going to go. It cuts down on innovation. It makes everything single thinking. And you just don't end up with as fast a growth or as broad of a reach of what you're doing when you're growing. So we really want to make sure that we involve everyone in the goal setting, both small goals and large goals. Okay, next one is understanding how KPIs work and how it connects to the objectives. So I know many people, worked with many people over the last few years about starting to collect what are the right KPIs and, you know, meeting and talking about it with your leaders and making, you know, having meetings and discussing them. One of the most common things that's difficult, it takes a while. It's a cultural thing in order to get people to really understand which are the right numbers, what do they mean, what kind of control do I have over those numbers? And, you know, what do I do if the number starts, you know, declining or if it starts growing? And, you know, and definitely, how do I tell the story about the numbers? That's tricky to do, right? We're trying to teach people that. And really, when it comes to KPIs or metrics, that's the key performance indicators, numbers that reflect things that are happening in your business. Our goal with them is for them to be able to, we have to take action on them. They should be predicting something in the future. They should be something that is indicated a problem that we can solve, that we're taking action on. We don't want to collect a million numbers just to be collecting them. We want to be able to collect numbers so that we can look at it and look for correlations. We can look for trends. We can look for problems, dips, gaps, those types of things. And we want our leaders to start to get used to the idea of, you know, what's the point of them and what can we do about them. This takes time. So we work with people on that, and you want to, you can do this just from very basic asking questions. When you're having this meeting, you're going through the KPIs, you can ask questions that prompt an interesting conversation.
The speed limit is 35 miles per hour.
Oh, somebody's speeding. They're going with the thought of go fast and break things. Okay. Anyway, so that's what we want to do, and you want to work with your people also in one-on-one meetings. If you've got leaders, it's good for you as a leader to have one-on-one meetings with those leaders, and the KPIs that are for their department, that's a great time for you to work one-on-one and teach them. What do they mean? How do they affect each other? And then when they come together as a group, they'll understand a lot more. Because there's nothing more frustrating than somebody saying, I'm really disappointed that the revenue is down. And yet in your department, you don't understand anything in your job about what I can do to actually affect that. So I'm just getting scolded for something that I don't really understand what I can do. Okay, the next one I will say is culture of collaboration. So just making it a culture of collaboration, that we know that even though we don't want to discuss everything by committee because nothing will get done, but for our big, major, important decisions in the company, in general, we tend to lean towards let's collaboratively. I'm going to listen to all the voices of all my leaders. They all matter. And we're going to collaboratively work on that. So, you know, they'll see that through maybe technology. Maybe you use something like a Slack channel for certain topics that people comment on. Maybe it's the way that you run teams and the types of topics or meetings, that the types of topics that you work on. Sometimes maybe the other leaders are running the meeting, not necessarily always you. In fact, when I facilitate big group meetings, I tend to not want the owner to do the talking first or the talking the most, because as soon as the owner starts talking, that means that some of the leaders, if they don't agree with you, that means they're wrong, right? So some people, especially if they're not particularly assertive, they are going to be reluctant to give you the opinions because they don't want to have an opposite opinion of what the owner, they figure you're the owner, you're right. And so it's best if you can try to make an environment where everybody is comfortable. It's okay to have some conflict. We are going to figure out ways in a good way to resolve conflict and to come up to a good solution. All right, the next one is kind of similar to earlier. We want the individual leaders to know how to short-term plan, medium plan, and long-term plan. We're going to expect them to come in these big group meetings and come up with the plans for the whole company. Well, how well do they do on their own plans? So maybe you can incorporate some of those things that when you have a meeting, when you have your one-on-ones, maybe you have them set short-term goals, medium goals, long-term goals, that you're checking in with them to see how it's going. Because if people don't do that in their lives very much, it's a new skill, and we're trying to get them to learn how to do that. All right, the next one is continual self-improvement. You really want leaders in your company, including yourself. You want them to see you, that you're constantly out there learning more new things, and you want them constantly learning more new things as well. One thing that can happen is, let's say you guys get really excited, you go to some ISSA convention, or you go visit another cleaning business, and you take a walk through, and you come back and you've got all these great ideas, and you come back and you say, here's my list of things I want you to do. But the leaders were not involved in any of that that activity. So you gave them a whole bunch of solutions to things that they didn't even know were problems. So a better way to do that might be that before you go to the convention, either that person goes with you, or you identify some objectives beforehand. And so that, hey, what kind of problems are you having right now? What kinds of things would you like us to look out for? You discuss that beforehand. So when you come back, the ideas that you have are actually solving the problems that you guys have already collaboratively decided are working. So anyway, we would like everybody to be self-improving all the time. If you tell someone, hey, I've got this leadership role, I'd like to promote you, and one of the job requirements is that you are taking a class or reading a book or attending some kind of, or you're listening to a podcast at least, once every 3 months. And you can select things in this category, or maybe you have tuition reimbursement program, or maybe you suggest some classes. There's 5 classes here. You can pick one of these, but let them know that is our culture. Everybody is always self-improving. Nobody gets to just sit and be the same, because the market does not sit and be the same. And then the next one I would say is leaders knowing their blind spots. If leaders do we really listen? Do we really know where our blind spots are? What are our weaknesses? Let's say you've got an employee who was really disgruntled and they took off and they had a lot of things to say. Do we listen to them? Do we take it to heart? Because if we dismiss every single one of those and say, they were a hothead, they were never that effective, I'm not paying any attention to that, before you know it, every leader you've got working for you is going to do the same thing. And we need people to even if somebody really had, let's say, some passionate views that you didn't agree with, there's always some grain of truth in it, and it's really hard for all of us to see our own selves. Every one of us has got strengths and weaknesses. And so we want to be open to the fact that all of us have blind spots. What are our blind spots? How can we diminish the effect of those blind spots? So you can do that through like 360-degree assessments. That's where instead, we're always surveying the employees about things. Instead, this is a performance review on the owners and the leaders. You have to have kind of a large company for this to work, because it works on anonymity. And if you've only got 2 employees working for you and they just rated you, it's going to be pretty obvious who rated what. But anyway, so, having that kind of feedback, you could also just keep it some loose questions. And also the way you accept feedback is really going to determine whether you get feedback. If every time somebody lets you know, well, actually, like I was just talking to someone today where employees had been letting this owner know, I don't feel like I'm making enough money. Okay, that's not a conversation any owner wants to hear, right? But it happens, right? And now they're at the point where that employee is going, or that leader is going to go to a competing company, because the competing company is going to pay more money. So had they listened a little bit earlier, had they, even though it's not a good topic, nobody wants to rework everything, but had they listened a little bit earlier, is there something else that we could have done? Maybe, maybe not. So, and then the last one is, it's kind of it's 5 things in one. But the last thing is we should all be perpetually working on our 5 emotional intelligence areas. empathy, self-awareness, self-regulation, social skills, and internal motivation. Meaning if we come to work and we're angry and we're frustrated, then that's going to come out in our work. If we don't have any empathy towards any of our employees, then that's going to come out in our ability to be a good leader. You know, we really want people to just work on our own personal skills all the time, especially in the areas of emotional intelligence. That's how we connect with people. This is a relationship business. You're making relationships with clients and relationships with employees. And if you have a very low emotional intelligence, you fly off the handle at any kind of moment of thing, or you burst into tears, or I'm saying you, but it could be any leader that you have working for you, then nobody's paying any attention to what you're really trying to get done, because they are trying to interact with something that's not quite logical. You know, so you really need to kind of, as an owner, it is always hard because we have to be the bigger person. You know, a lot of times you're being treated unfairly about maybe an unhappy employee or something like that, but we always have to be the ones that come in and we are leading by example, and we are taking it on the chin and making sure that we're listening to what their point of view is, and controlling our own behaviors, and doing all of that so that we can be the inspiring leader in the room that everybody wants to be. So there was my big, huge brain dump of areas of leadership development. How did you guys do? Please,
This was fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sherry.
That was wonderful.
Excellent.
I'd like to, if we have, we don't have much time, but I'm curious to know, you know, people's take on, or maybe examples of what you talked about, old being that we hold employees accountable versus the new way, which is removing barriers so that they hold themselves accountable. So I don't know, talk me through that a little bit more.
Okay. Well, it basically, if you're not motivated to, and you don't understand clearly what you're supposed to do. Well, let's say, for example, a really common reason that leaders don't do what you want them to do is because owners aren't aware, but they're changing the rules in the middle of the process. And so they will be coming back and saying, I thought I told you that every single time you talk to this type of client, we needed to ask these 5 questions. And me talking to both parties, right? I'm listening to both the leader and I'm listening to the owner. It's clear to me that it was subtle, but the expectations were not really aligned to begin with. So you're going to get a lot further instead of trying to prove that the employee is wrong, instead of trying to prove that they did something bad, because nobody feels good. They're going to run away from anything that they feel bad about doing. Look first to say, what could I have done better? Did I set those expectations clearly? Did I provide all the resources? Make sure that you remove all of those barriers. Sometimes it does come down to the fact that they just didn't do it, you know, or they didn't do it right. But in general, look first to the things you have in your own control, which is, did I create an environment? Another good common example would be time management. You'll cram so many things and expectations into what you want an employee to do, and then you'll be constantly changing the priorities throughout the day. How can we expect them to prioritize their own time when you're changing the priorities? They chose to work on A, but now you decided to chastise them because they didn't work on B. And so that, look at those things that are in your control, you'll get a lot further, and then they will feel successful, and then they will work harder. There's something called the 5 dysfunctions of the team from Patrick Liccioni, which talks about a pyramid that you're never going to get to the level of accountability unless you start from the very basic level of trust. You have to have trust to have commitment. You have to have commitment, you know, what's the next one? Boy, it escapes me. Basically, you have to have all of these things before you can get to accountability and you can get to results. You have to start with a level of trust. And if they're afraid to tell you anything, then you're not going to get to the other levels. All right.
Any other questions from anyone? In the chat, we have, how can we get a copy of the levels of authority?
I'll send them to Erin. I'll send them to Erin, and then she can send them out. Is that all right, Erin?
I'm muted. Sorry. Yes, that absolutely works.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
I think we're getting close to the bottom of the hour, but Renee, if you have time, we usually do a breakout room with our speakers, so I can create a breakout room.
I have a few minutes. I have a call in just a few minutes, but yeah, sure. That sounds good. We'll break it out.
And then I typically, I don't know, Stacy, we can do a breakout room to talk about membership and the ISSA show, because that was one thing I wanted to mention. I put that in the chat already, that registration is now open for the ISSA show. If you haven't booked, you want to get your ticket, because I promise you, if you, we have several members of our show committee here. We've put together a great program for you where I'm working on lining up some of our speakers to be on Coffee and Conversation as a guest. They'll be on, I know we had one of our speakers, Victoria Yassam, was featured on Smart Business Moves yesterday. We'll be doing webinars with Libby and some of our other speakers as we lead up to the show, just to kind of give you some sneak peeks of the education available. But I put a link in the chat to the full education schedule, and we have a lot on tap for you at the show. We're going to tackle everything from AI to sales and marketing to customer service, and really just try and, provide you with the resources that you need. And, I think what everybody says, and anybody feel free to echo in, the best part of the show is connecting with your community.
Our next Coffee and Conversation is August 1st.
Yes.
Yes, and
Yep.
thank you, Renee, so much for being here. So if we can jump into the breakout rooms.
Yep.
And if anyone has questions to Renee, or that would be wonderful.